Montana Territory, summer of 1879. The sun was high, the dirt dry, and the old wagon road cut like a scar through the prairie. Mara Collins stood alone at the edge of her family's land, the welt on her cheek still fresh, her chest tight with swallowed words. A single suitcase sat at her feet, stitched leather, cracked at the corners, same one her mother used when she left for good. Mara knew she would not be going back either. She had spoken again. She had dared to say her brother was wrong for striking their horse until it bled. And for that, her father had backhanded her in front of the others. Her brothers said nothing. Her stepmother had turned away. But Mara had looked her father straight in the eye and said, "I'm leaving." He had laughed, but she was not bluffing. Half a mile down the road, the sun caught on the shape of a lone rider. The man was tall in the saddle, coat worn, hat dipped low. His horse moved slow, steady, like it had nowhere to be but carried purpose all the same. She did not move. The man slowed, reined in just a few feet from her, looked down without speaking at first. His eyes were a deep brown, steady and calm, like the kind of quiet that comes after a storm. "You need help?" he asked finally. "I need to go," she said, voice rough from dust and silence. He glanced at the angry red mark on her cheek, then at the suitcase by her boots. "Where to?" "Anywhere that is not here," he nodded once. "I'm headed back south to my spread. It's a few miles past Ash Creek. You're welcome to ride with me." She hesitated, but only for a second. "Why would you help me?" "Because I can," he said simply. "Name's Fletcher Price." "Mara," she said. "Mara Collins." He leaned down and offered his hand. She took it, her palm calloused from years of work, his warm and firm. He helped her up behind him. The saddle creaked as she settled in. He did not ask anything else, just turned the horse and rode on. They reached his homestead by nightfall. It was not much one-story cabin, barn half-built, a simple corral, but it was clean, quiet, and his. A dog came out barking but stopped the moment Fletcher dismounted. "I'll sleep in the barn," Mara said quickly, sliding off the horse. "No," Fletcher said, looking at her without judgment. "You'll sleep in the house. Spare room's clean. You're under my roof now. Speak freely here." She blinked. "What?" He stepped aside, holding the door open for her. "Whatever you want to say, you say it. No one's going to raise a hand against you here." No one had ever said that to her before. The words hit her harder than the bruise on her cheek. She stepped inside. Over the next few days, Mara learned the rhythm of Fletcher's life. He rose early, worked hard, spoke little but always with care. He had no one else on the land, no wife, no children. Just a quiet life carved out with his own hands. She helped in the kitchen, mended his shirts, swept the porch without being asked. She had done these things before, but never without fear. One morning, while she hung a sheet to dry, Fletcher came up beside her, holding 2 cups of coffee. He offered one. "You always work like this?" he asked. She shrugged. "It is all I know." He looked at her a long moment. "You do not have to prove yourself." "I am not," she said quickly, then paused. "I just want to be useful." He nodded. "You already are." That night a storm rolled over the hills. Thunder cracked and wind howled through the eaves. Mara sat on the floor by the fire, arms wrapped around her knees. Fletcher stayed near, sharpening a blade, but his eyes kept flicking to her. "You all right?" he asked quietly. She nodded, but her hands trembled. He stood, crossed the room, and crouched beside her. "You do not have to be scared here." "I know," she whispered. "But sometimes my body forgets." He reached out real slow and took her hand in his. "Then we will remind it, one day at a time." She looked up at him, and for the first time since she left, she let the tears fall. He stayed right there with her. Days turned into weeks. The bruises faded. Her voice grew steadier. She laughed once, caught herself, but Fletcher smiled when she did. "You sound good when you do that," he said. She blushed, looked down. "I did not know I still could." He leaned his elbows on the porch rail beside her. "You are strong, Mara." "No," she said. "I just survived." Surviving is strength. They stood in silence, watching dusk settle over the prairie. One morning she came out to the barn and found Fletcher fixing the broken gate. She rolled up her sleeves without asking and grabbed a hammer. He looked up. "You do not have to," she grinned. I want to, he chuckled, and the sound was warm. Well, all right then. They worked side by side, their hands brushing now and then. When it was done, Fletcher stood back, wiped his brow, and looked at her. You ever think of staying? She froze. He stepped closer. I mean it. You are free to go whenever you want, but if you want to stay. I would not mind. She stared at him, her heart pounding. Why would you want me here? Because since you came, the place feels like more than just land. He paused, took a breath. It feels like home. Mara swallowed hard. I do not know what to say. You do not have to say anything now, he said gently. Just think about it. She nodded, but the truth was already blooming in her chest. She had never felt safer than under his roof, never felt more seen, and for the first time she believed she might be loved. The rye grass had grown tall near the creek, rustling in the wind like whispered secrets. Mara knelt in the shade of a cottonwood tree, her fingers damp with river mud as she rinsed the last of the morning's dishes. The cold water numbed her hands, but she didn't pull away. She liked the sting. It reminded her she could stay as long as she chose. No one could drag her back. Fletcher's voice came low from behind her. I was thinkin' of buildin' a second lean-to for the west pasture. If you've a mind to help me measure it, I'd welcome the company. She stood, wiping her hands on the hem of her apron. You always ask like I've got a choice. You do, he said, meeting her eyes. Every time. They walked together up the slope toward the barn, the sun warm on their backs. Fletcher carried a coil of rope and a cedar stake over his shoulder. Mara carried silence, comfortable now, not heavy. He stopped where the grass flattened, watching the horizon. Back in Missouri, I was apprenticed to a cooper. Spent near 5 years shaping barrels, never once thought I'd end up running cattle. What made you leave? My pa died of wound fever after the war. Ma followed not long after. There wasn't anything left except the echo. I figured if I was going to build a life, it ought to be somewhere the earth still felt untouched. She studied his profile, the way his jaw tightened at the memory but didn't flinch. I never met a man who left grief behind without turning mean. I didn't leave it behind, he said. I just gave it a place to rest. They measured out the lean-to with quiet efficiency. Mara held the rope taut while Fletcher drove the stake into the ground. Sweat gathered at his temple, and she noticed the old scar just above his ear, a pale mark that curved like a crescent moon. She hadn't seen it before. He caught her looking. Rail ties snapped while I was layin' track near Helena, knocked me clean into a ditch. Woke up 2 days later with my head stitched by a miner's wife who'd never held a needle except for darning wool. That why you quit? He nodded. Didn't see the sense in calling that a life, barely kept mine. They finished marking the posts as the sun dipped toward late afternoon. Fletcher wiped his hands on his trousers and looked toward the cabin. You hungry yet? I could eat, she said. Inside, she sliced bread while he tended the fire. The kitchen smelled of wood smoke and onions. She set 2 tin plates on the table, then hesitated. I never thanked you, she said, for not asking me what I ran from. You don't owe me thanks, he said, stirring the stew. But if there's a day you want to speak, I'll listen. She sat down, folding her hands in her lap. My mother used to sing while she shelled peas. It's the only thing I remember about her that was soft. After she left, I tried humming the same tune. My father told me I wasn't fit to open my mouth unless it was for prayer or apology. Fletcher didn't speak. He simply set her bowl down in front of her, then took his seat. I don't want to be afraid of my voice, she said. Not anymore. Then don't be, he said. You've got a good one. She didn't smile, but something in her shoulders eased. Later, while she stitched a tear in one of his sleeves, Fletcher brought out a wooden box. He opened it on the table between them. Inside were letters, yellowing at the edges, bound with a strip of twine. My ma wrote these when I first left, he said. Never sent him. I found him in her sewing basket after she passed. Mara looked at him, unsure of his meaning. I thought you might want to read him. They aren't mine to keep shut anymore. She reached out, touched the top envelope. Are you sure? I trust you, he said. That's enough. She didn't open them right away. Just sat with her hand resting on them, the weight of trust heavier than she expected. That night, Fletcher lit a lantern and left it burning low between their rooms. Mara stood in the doorway of her own, watching the soft light flicker. "I'd like to stay," she said. "Not just for now." He turned slowly, his face unreadable at first, then his voice came, quiet and certain. "Then we'll build it together, whatever comes next." She nodded once. Then she stepped back into her room, the door left open behind her. The first frost came overnight, silvering the ground in hush. When Mara stepped outside that morning, her breath rose in clouds, and the grass beneath her boots crackled like thin ice. Fletcher was already by the chicken coop, sleeves rolled, his collar damp with dew. He gave her a nod, handed her a pail without a word. They worked side by side until the sun climbed high enough to melt the cold from the fence rails. That evening, as she brought in the last of the laundry, she paused by the porch where Fletcher sat whittling a length of birch. He shaved off slivers with patient strokes, the pieces falling soft into the folds of his coat. "What are you making?" she asked, brushing lint from her apron. He turned the small figure in his hands. "Horse for my niece, she's near 6 now, lives with my sister in Dakota Territory." "I didn't know you had kin there," he nodded, eyes fixed on the carving. "Just her. My sister married a surveyor after the war. Good man. They write come spring and Christmas." Mara sat on the step below him, tucking her knees beneath her skirt. "Do they know about this place?" "Some. I sent word when I bought the land, haven't seen them since." He paused, then added, "You'd like her. She's sharp with a needle and sharper with her tongue." Mara tilted her head. "Sharp can be good." Fletcher looked at her then, his gaze settling. "Sharp kept me alive." She didn't look away. Later that week, a man from the nearest township came riding up, dust trailing behind his mule-drawn cart. He brought with him flour, lamp oil, and a letter sealed in wax. Fletcher read it with a crease between his brows, then handed it to Mara without a word. Her eyes moved over the page slowly. "They want to buy your east pasture," he nodded. "That rail company's pushing north again. They offered 3 times what it's worth." "Will you sell?" "I haven't decided." She folded the letter carefully. "If you did, what would you do with the money? Build the barn proper? Maybe finish the loft, buy a milk cow?" "You could do all that without selling," she said. He gave a dry chuckle. "I could, but I've lived long enough to know some things are worth more than coin." Mara leaned back. "Like what?" He didn't answer right away. Then, "Peace. A name that means something, a roof someone can call theirs." She looked at her hands. "I never thought I'd have that." "You do now." That night, she stitched a wool blanket in the corner of the cabin, the fire casting long shadows across the floor. Fletcher set down a tin of nails and pulled up a chair beside her. "I've been thinking," he said, voice low. "About your voice." She didn't look up from her needle. "What about it? You've got a good ear. Not just for music, though I can tell you do, but for the way things fit. The way you fix things around here, that takes knowing." She tied off her thread and set the blanket aside. "Nobody ever called it that. You ever think about putting it to use? Beyond this place," she frowned. "What do you mean?" "There's a schoolhouse going up near the Fork Road. They'll be needing a teacher by spring." Mara stared at the fire. "You think I could do that?" "I know you could." She was quiet a long time. "I never finished schooling. Don't matter. You've got sense and you care. That's more than most." She turned toward him then, something steady in her eyes. "Would you want me to?" "I'd want you happy. Even if that meant spending my days with other folks' children and not here." Fletcher's jaw worked for a moment. Then he said, "So long as you come home to me." Mara didn't speak. She reached across the space between them and placed her hand over his. That was her answer. The next morning, she took off at first light with Fletcher's horse and a sack of biscuits tied behind the saddle. She rode to the schoolhouse frame, still just a skeleton of beams and planks, and asked the foreman if they were looking. By nightfall, she was back, cheeks raw from the wind, eyes bright in a way Fletcher hadn't seen before. "They said they'd let me try come spring," she said, breathless on the porch. He stepped forward, brushing a stray curl from her brow. "Then we'd best get you ready." She reached for his hand. He took it. "You're sure?" she asked. "I'm sure," he said. "This land's ours. We build what we want on it." And in that moment, beneath a sky deepening to navy, with frost returning to the grass and the cabin warm behind them, they understood what they were building was not just a life, it was a future. Together. By late winter, the land wore a coat of brittle snow, thin enough that grass still poked through in patches. The cold had settled into the bones of the cabin, making every chore a test of will. Fletcher split wood each morning before sunrise, his breath hanging around him like smoke. Mara boiled beans on the stove, fingers red from the pump handle out back. The days passed slow but honest, marked by the rhythm of shared work and the quiet ease of two people no longer waiting to be alone. One morning, Mara stood at the window, watching a flock of starlings wheel over the treetops. Fletcher came in from the yard, brushing snow from his coat, and hung his hat on the hook by the door. "I've been thinking," she said, still looking out, "about what I used to imagine marriage was when I was a girl." He crossed to the stove and poured himself a cup of coffee. "Go on." "I thought it meant surrender, getting handed over like livestock. Being told who you were and what you owed for it." He leaned against the table, cup warming his hands. "And now I think it might mean something else, if it's chosen, if it's built." He didn't speak right away. Just watched her, the way her shoulders held steady, the way her voice didn't falter. "I've been thinking too," he said finally, "about how I'd ask you." Mara turned from the window, heart thudding. "You were going to, I was waiting, thought maybe spring would be right. But maybe it's now." She stepped toward him, slow but sure. "Ask me." Fletcher set the cup down, his voice didn't rise, didn't tremble. "Will you be my wife, Mara? Under no man's rule but your own, and beside me by your choosing," she nodded once, eyes bright. "Yes." "I will." He reached for her hand and she let him. No grand gesture, just two hands meeting, palms lined with labor and warmth. They were married by the county clerk in a room that smelled of ink and old paper, with Fletcher's dog waiting outside and a borrowed ribbon in Mara's hair. The clerk asked if they wanted a witness. Fletcher looked at Mara and she shook her head. They needed no one else to make it real. Afterward, they rode back through the valley, the wind tugging at her shawl. She leaned into him, her arms around his waist, and he held the reins loose, trusting the horse to know the way. That night, they returned to the cabin with frost clinging to their lashes. Fletcher lit the lamp while Mara unwrapped the loaf of bread she'd baked that morning. They ate quietly, then washed up together, sleeves wet to the elbows. Later, lying beneath the quilt she'd stitched through winter, Mara traced the line of Fletcher's collarbone with one finger. "Do you ever wish for more?" she asked. "More than this," he said. "No. This is the most I've ever had that mattered." She pressed her forehead to his shoulder. "I want to make sure we never forget what it took to get here." "We won't," he said. "It's in us now, every bruise, every mile." Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. Inside, their breath was soft and even. The fire had burned low, but the room held its warmth. They had built something steady, something no one could take, and in the hush between night and dawn, they slept with their fingers laced, a quiet promise carried from one heartbeat to the next. By early May, the thaw had reached the hills. Snowmelt fed the creek behind the barn, and the land turned soft underfoot, the soil rich with promise. Fletcher stood near the corral, hammering the last plank into a new fence rail while Mara leaned against the gate, her arms folded, skirts dusted with pollen from the wild mustard blooming along the fence line. "They're building the schoolhouse roof today," she said, squinting toward the horizon. "I told them I'd come help with the ledgers after supper." Fletcher tapped the nail flush before replying, "You'll take the cart, I'll walk. It's only 2 miles." He rested his hands against the top rail, gaze steady. "You sure that's wise?" "I've walked farther and worse," she said, brushing hair from her cheek. "Besides, I like the quiet between here and there." He didn't press her, only nodded and turned back to the hammer, but she caught the faint shift in his jaw, a worry he didn't voice. After the evening meal, she tied on her shawl and took a small oil lamp from the shelf. "Don't wait up," she said, brushing his sleeve as she passed. "I always do," he said. The schoolhouse sat halfway between the creek bend and the edge of town. a long rectangle of pine with a pitched roof and a brick chimney still dark from curing. Fletcher's hand had helped raise half of it, and Mara's had written the names of the first pupils in a neat ledger kept in a flour sack behind the pulpit. She returned home well past dark, her boots rimmed with mud from the spring road. Fletcher was sitting on the porch, sharpening a drawknife by lantern light. "Everything straight?" he asked without looking up. "They're short on benches. I told them I'd bring scrap wood from the old chicken shed." He set the drawknife aside. "You hungry?" She shook her head. "They fed me biscuits and dried apples. I brought you some." He waited until she sat beside him before he took the cloth bundle from her hands. After unwrapping it, he tore off a piece and passed it back to her. They ate in slow silence, the kind that didn't need filling. "I've been thinking," she said after a time, "about taking in a boarder. Teacher's pay isn't much and the back room's just gathering dust." "You want another body in the house?" he asked, not unkindly, "not just anyone." "There's a girl Anna her father passed last winter, and her mother's been working the laundry near the fort. They're sleeping in the store's storeroom. I thought maybe if she boarded here her mother could rest." Fletcher leaned back, fingers laced behind his head. "You've got a generous heart." Mara looked up at the stars, bright in the spring sky. "I just remember what it felt like to have nowhere." By the end of the week, Anna came with a sack of clothes and a pair of worn shoes wrapped in twine. Mara helped her settle into the back room, placing a single candle by the bed and tucking the quilt tight around the mattress. Fletcher built her a writing desk from spare pine and left it by the window without a word. The girl was quiet but not afraid. She helped with the eggs and tended the garden without needing to be asked. At night, she read aloud from the primer, stumbling only on the longer words. Fletcher listened from the porch, pipe in hand, while Mara mended seams or copied lesson plans by lamplight. One evening in early June, Mara stood in the garden rows, watching the first tomato vines bloom. Fletcher came up behind her, brushing soil from his hands. "You still think this place is enough?" she asked, not turning. He stepped beside her and looked toward the field. "I think it's more than enough. I think it's ours." She slipped her hand into his. "I didn't know I could be this content." He squeezed her fingers gently. "We made it so." The school opened its doors with little ceremony. 10 children came, some barefoot, some with ribboned pigtails or patched knees. Mara stood at the front of the room, chalk in hand, her back straight. Fletcher watched from the doorway, hat in hand, before tipping it once and walking back down the hill. That night, she found a small box on the table, wrapped in calico cloth. Inside was a brooch carved from cherry wood, shaped like a sprig of sage. Fletcher didn't mention it, just poured her tea and asked, "How'd they take to their letters?" She pinned the brooch to her collar and said, "Like they'd waited all winter." The seasons turned and the house settled further into its bones. The barn got its second coat of stain, and the porch rails sagged a little less with each repair. Anna grew tall and sure, her braids longer and her voice stronger. She stayed even after her mother found steadier work, saying only, "It feels like home here." One autumn morning, Mara stood barefoot in the kitchen, steam rising from the kettle, and turned to Fletcher with a smile still half-formed. "I think I'm carrying," she said. He didn't speak right away. Just set down his coffee and crossed the floor, his hands finding hers slow and certain. "You sure?" "Sure enough." He kissed her forehead, then her mouth, then held her like the world had finally settled right. They spent the winter preparing. Fletcher built a cradle from pine and lined it with soft wool, and Mara stitched a name into the corner of each blanket. When spring came, it brought with it a daughter with dark eyes and lungs strong enough to startle the chickens. They named her Clara, after Fletcher's mother. She slept with one hand curled at her cheek and never cried without reason. Anna watched over her when Mara returned to the schoolhouse. Fletcher added a swing to the porch and a bench beneath the cottonwood tree. The house, once quiet, now held layers of sound laughter, footsteps, lullabies hummed under breath. And through it all, Mara and Fletcher moved together like two lines braided into one. Years passed, and the land changed shape beneath their hands. The fence posts aged, the orchard deepened, and the house grew soft at the corners. But the center held. They read by firelight in the evenings, walked the creek path on warm Sundays, and each night before the lamp was turned down, Fletcher would touch her cheek and say, "Still ours." And Mara, always with the same answer, "Still and always." They had no need for declarations. They had the life they chose, the peace they built, the love that never once had to ask for proof. It was quiet. It was steady. It was home.